Okay, well, it's my great pleasure to introduce Urmi Ghosh Dastidhar. She got her PhD in applied mathematics from a joint NGIT Rutgers program. And she has been at City Tech since 2003. And her research includes parameter estimation via optimization, infectious disease modeling, graph theory applications. She also is developing biomath modules for this organization called Sensor. So that's SENCER. And Urmi shared an office with me for many years, and we have met for social events. In particular, I found memories of her daughter's first rice meal, which in Hindi is Anna Prashan, and in Bengali is Mukhe Bat. And I know that she is an outstanding visual artist as well. Yeah, so.
Okay, thank you, Ezra, for the introduction. Yeah, we shared office for a long time, so our friendship goes long way back, several years, many years. So today I'm going to talk about how we used a graph theory approach to analyze drug trafficking network. This work is jointly done with my undergraduate applied math students, Katie Salas, and Katie is also present today. And this work is our summer research. Last summer, we did it with a grant from the Department of Homeland Security. And we have performed it in Criminal Investigation and Network Analysis Center at George Mason University. So we are very grateful for this opportunity. So that's me and Katie, and we are in a field trip when we are at GMU, when I think we went to the body farm. So this is a picture from body farm when we're visiting a body farm. So the problem is that given a graph with a set of nodes V and set of ages is E, when we talk about the drug trafficking network, V represents the players of the network, and H set E represents the communications between the players or actors. And the weight matrix, Wij, is basically gives us the strength of communication and between two actors, I and J. And the way we calculated it, we calculated the number of shared actors or shared correspondents, same shared actors between I and J actors. So given that network, a drug trafficking network with a weighted communication ages, the problem is whether we can possibly partition the graph G into two subgraphs, GA and GB, using spectral clustering method to optimize a function MCUT. So we are going to bipartition the graph where that maximizes the similarities between two groups within the groups, but minimizes the similarity between two different groups or cuts. So, and then on top of that, we also try to improve the result obtained by spectral clustering method using linkage-based refinement method to see whether it improves our cut value, which means whether it lowers our objective function. We'll show you the objective function later. And some of the questions that we wanted to know: who are the key players of the network, who are the important person, who is the strategist in criminal networks, and so on and so forth. So what we did, the goals and objectives, basically given the network data, we built an adjacency matrix based on criminal network. And from there, we created Laplacian. And we used spectral clustering methods to identify and optimize two different clusters within the network, and then used linkage-based refinements technique to further optimize these clusters, aiming to have the similarity within the clusters high and between the clusters low. And then analyze communication strength among various actors within a drug trafficking network and similar covert organizations, detect key players, leaders, interrelationships within the data network, using various centrality measures and thus aids in strategic disruption by law enforcement personnel. So that's the process for first data collection, build adjacency metrics of the directed network. Then from there, we created an undirected network and build adjacency metrics from that. Then we computed Laplacian, we calculated Fiedler order, and then we created partition based on spectral clustering, calculate objective function value, apply linkage-based density technique. Again, calculate the objective function value. If the linkage-based density technique improves the value of the objective function, then we accept the move. If it does not, we leave it as it is. So this is basically a basic spectral clustering method. The first graph is present a directed graph. In our case, we present when arrow goes from 1 to 4 and 1 to 2. We represent it that the communication, some kind of communication is happening and the information is going from actor 1 to actor 2 and actor 4. And when we create an adjacency matrix from this directed matrix, I think the arrow goes from 1 to 2 and 1 to 4. So if you look at the first row, we have a 1 here and 1 there. The opposite should be 0, which means 2 to 1 and 2 to 4 is 0 because the information is not going from 2 to 1 and 2 to 4. So if you go to 2, second row and first column, that's 0. And then fourth row, first column, that's 0. And we do this for all 6 nodes for here. This is the undirected graph. So the competition matrix, actually, this is called competition matrix. I believe we did it from the same graph here. So we developed the undirected graph from the directed graph. So if you look here, 2 and let me see, 2 and 4 share the same node 1, which means they are getting information from actor 1, both of them. So if you look at undirected graph, 2 and 4 is joined by an edge. Similarly, 4 and 5, let's see, 1 brings information to 5 and 1 gives information to 4. So 4 and 5 is also joined by edge. 1 is not receiving any shared information. So 1 is represented as an isolated node. So when we build the adjacency matrix from this undirected graph, we actually build it if 2 and 4 is connected. So 2 and 4 is 1. Again, 4 and 2 is 1. So when we build an adjacency matrix from the undirected graph, it results in a symmetric matrix. And the optimization function that we're looking at is given by cut AB, this one, where cut of AB is defined by WAB. Let's see what WAB represents here. So WAB is given as a weighted matrix. And if you look here, I belongs to A, J belongs to B means ith node is in cluster A and jth node in cluster B. So when we look at Wij, we look at the weight or communication strength between 2 different actors who belong in 2 different partitions, 2 different groups, A and B. And this Wij can be more than 1 when the nodes I and nodes J shared some common actors between both of them. So if they shared 2 actors or 3 actors, if they receive information from common actors, let's say 3 actors, then Wij is going to be 3. And WA represent basically, it's the weighted matrix. So when you look at the communication strength between the same group, between the nodes within the same group A and same group B, where Wij represent, cut AB represent the communication strength between the nodes belong to 2 different group clusters A and B. So if you look, this is the important thing. If you look at this function, if we want to lower the similarities between 2 clusters, we want to minimize cut of AB, which means we want to minimize the communication. We want the cut to happen based on the communication happening between two different clusters A and B. So we want to minimize the similarities between in cutoff A, B, when we want to maximize the similarities within the network. So we want to maximize WA and WB, but we want to minimize cutoff AB. So our goal, both goals can be satisfied by minimizing MCut, because in both cases, MCut is going to be minimized. So this is a more definition. This is, I think this is a matrix, a Laplacian for unweighted, and this is a Laplacian for weighted matrix. This is degree matrix, and this is the adjacency matrix that we developed from the drug trafficking network. And when you have more than one, when you have the weights, then this number 1 will be 2, 3, 4, or whatever the numbers is. And we look the way we actually do the partition spectral clustering method. There it looks at the Fiedler order. So what it does, it calculates the eigenvalues and of the Laplacian. And the first eigenvalue, because it's a symmetric matrix, the assumption it's a connected matrix. So the first eigenvalue should be 0. And all if the graph is completely connected, then there will be no eigenvalues which is 0 except the first one. If we have more than 1 0 eigenvalues, so algebraic multiplicity of the 0 eigenvalues give you the number of disconnected components within the network. So the graph we're looking at, it is connected. So the only eigenvalues we have algebraic multiplicity is 1, so that we have only 0 eigenvalue. If that's the case, then we look at this second eigenvalue, which is non-zero, and we look at the second eigenvector corresponding to the second eigenvalue. That gives you Fiedler vector. And this is a very basic, simple algorithm that we followed, by clustering algorithm. Okay, let's go back to here. So what it says that cluster A, when we find the second eigenvector, the elements which has negative values, we can put it in the one cluster, and which has greater than or equal to 0 values of the second eigenvector would put in different cluster. And this cluster do not share any nodes. So these are disjoint clusters. So what we did here, we actually tried to get real data, but when we received the real data during our summer research work, we received it 2 weeks before our program ends because of all the complexities and logistics, because those are private data, and we are really looking at a real drug network where people are talking, text messages and everything. So it was a huge data set with a lot of text message. So we were not able to complete our work with the data set that we received. It's not actually data set. We have to build the data set from real text messaging that was happening between actors. So what we did, because it was taking time, we looked at a published work, and Katie took a long time. It takes a lot of time from her part to look at the network and build this network which has 128 actors, and there were 731 communication took place. It took place in New South Wales, Australia, and there are 36 individuals who engaged in illicit actions. And the way the authors of this paper gathered the records were retrieved from the office of the Director of Public Prosecutor. And documentation filed in these files included telephone intercept data, listening devices, summaries from within the Director of Public Prosecutor office, interval recommendation regarding charges, files indicating charges laid and facts relating to these charges, criminal history records, police statements, witness and informant's testimony, surveillance report, and so on and so forth. So the data that we specifically looked at, the data was recorded on phone conversation, based on phone conversation, reports of physical surveillance, transcripts of listening devices, And relational data was coded based on the types of resources exchanged between the two actors and the direction of the exchange between actors. So as I have said, there were 128 actors with 731 links. There were known types of links, which are 227, and any unknown types of links are excluded from this network. There are different kind of links, which is tangible and intangible. Tangible links involves the communications regarding drugs, money, precursors, equipment, premises. And intangible is information when you share knowledge, when you share skills, labor, in fact, how to produce the drug or meth and all those information. You can actually see all those text messages, how to do those things. And the data that we excluded, or the original author excluded from the network, where they can see the actors are connected, but it was not known what kind of relationship connects two actors. So again, Katie took a long time to develop. This is the original network built, and you can see this is a directed network. And I think there are 128 actors with 731 links. So this is built on, and the information, if you look at that direction of arrow, that means actor 25 is providing some information to 40. So this is the direction of flow of the information. And from there, we built an undirected network. So the way we have built it, so like, for example, if you look at, it's very hard to go back, sorry, to the original work and find out the nodes. But if you look here, 26 and 35, they are connected by age. We did not put age weight there, but there are actually age weights, which means how strongly 26 and 35 are connected. And the way we built this connection, that if 26 and 35 shared, like receiving information from 4 different actors, but it's the same actors between 26 and 35. So what we do, we see that there is a communication, shared communication of with 26 and 35 with another actor or another 4 actors, and we'll put the age weight as 4. So if there is a communication between 115 and 26 is only 1, we put 1, and so on and so forth. So this graph, although we do not show the weights here, it is actually weighted undirected graph. So during this process, we also leave some of the nodes that do not get shared information from other nodes. So then we looked at the undirected adjacency matrix of the undirected network. We developed the Laplacian. We looked at the eigenvalues, and sure enough, we have only one eigenvalue, which is 0. And obviously the second eigenvalue is non-zero value. And the eigenvector, so this eigenvectors, which is Fiedler vector, is associated with the second eigenvalues. And if you look at these 5 values, these are all positive elements. So based on bipartitioning spectral clustering technique, we put all the eigenvalues, all the elements which are negative values in one cluster, and all the nodes associated with positive elements of this vector is another cluster. And that's a picture. So this is cluster A, which has 35, 49, 26, 115, 89. So if you go back, I think this is, let me see, that's a 26th position maybe. I'm not sure how we put the eigenvalue. It doesn't look like 26. I don't know how it's done, but maybe. Anyway, so the nodes are, we put the nodes based on, we did the clustering based on those values. So cluster B, I think, have more negative values of the elements of the nodes, and these have positive values. And, this picture is kind of very, because we have too many data points, it looks like very dark. If you make it larger, it's a much clearer view. And then once we have that, So we actually obtained our MCAT value when we did this. We evaluate the MCAT value when we did spectral clustering, and which we'll show you later. And then we used a linkage-based density refinement technique to see whether we can improve the MCAT objective function value. And that way to do it, what linkage-based refinement technique does, it looks at the similarity between individual node U and the cluster. So if the node U belongs to A, cluster A, we expect the node U to have more similarities with the cluster A and less similarities with the cluster B. So we expect this value to be larger and this value to be smaller. Similarly, if a node belongs to the cluster B, we expect this to be larger, this to be lower. So if a node belongs to cluster A, we expect this value delta LU to be positive. If the node belongs to B, we expect this to be negative. So what we look at the graph here, this is based on the nodes. And we did the linkage difference. We look at all the values. So you can see some of the values are below 0 negative and some of the values are positive. So what we did, we identify the nodes. In the next slide, you will see we identify the nodes where some of the nodes are, I don't know, I don't recall which one happened, but I'm going to tell you. So if the nodes belongs to A, but it shows this delta LU shows negative value, that means even though we put the node in A by spectral clustering method, we expect the node has higher similarities with the cluster B. So we take the node U, we put it in cluster B, and we calculated the MCAT value. If the MCAT value gets lower, then we accept the move. If the MCAT value does not get lower, then we keep the node as it is. So what we did, the original MCAT value we obtained by spectral clustering method is 0.6053. And I think we identified the nodes 9, 11, 37, and 66. The original cluster, it was in cluster B. So I believe the delta LU should be negative in those for each of 4 nodes because the cluster is in B, but it has positive values. So we thought maybe it is more has more similarities with cluster A. So we moved 9, 11, 37, and 66 to cluster A and recalculate the original MCAT. But we have higher number of MCAT, so which means the move that we have done for each of these points are not good move. So we return it to the original cluster B. But then we thought, okay, why is this actually method? Because we know the drug trafficking network is kind of, the density is low because people want to keep less communication so they don't get prosecuted or caught up. So we did, we look at the density. So this is the density of the network that we looked at. And then we looked at another network which I actually worked on, Hudson River data, and that has higher density. And the picture doesn't look like higher density because it has a smaller number of nodes than DTN, the other one, but it is actually have higher density. So we did the similar method. We applied similar method to this data set to see what happens. But before we talk about the comparison, I want to introduce, I will show you the comparison between 2 different networks. Before that, let's talk about some other measures that we look at when we talk about drug trafficking network. One of the measures we look at is degree centrality. It shows the vertices with highest number of connections in the network, and it helps identify and hubs within a network, which means, you know, if the police goes and try to find out, it is more, it has higher visibility because it has higher number of connections. Between centrality is help finding some important vertices in the network. So it is more like a strategist player in the drug trafficking network. Vertices with the highest betweenness centrality are the ones with the highest number of shortest pathways going through them, which means it is important network because it has important connection. What it measures, not the number of connections matter, quality of connection matters. Then you have closeness centrality. It helps identifying vertices in the central part of a network. And vertices in the central part have a shortest distance to other vertices in the network. They're closer to other vertices. So let's look at the definition. So these are the definition. This is degree centrality is basically the easiest way to calculate. And it has a number of direct contacts surrounding a node. And nodes with higher degree centrality are basically those that attract a high concentration of direct connection within a network, which means it has high visibility. And if you look at betweenness centrality, this is interesting. It measures the number of shortest paths that pass through a vertex. So sigma STV is number of those paths that passes the vertex V or node V. And sigma ST, this is total number of shorted paths from node S to node T. So this is a total number of shortest path going from one node to another node, node S to node T. And this one is number of those paths that pass through a medium, another node V. And what is importance of betweenness centrality, that it is not the quality of quantity of connection, the quality of connection measures. So the greater a node is located along the shortest path in the network, the higher the betweenness centrality is. So it's important position. And then look at the clustering coefficient that measures the density of the network for each vertex. So if you look at the first one, Ni is links to the node I and number of neighbors to node I. So if you look at the first one, this vertex, it is connected to 3 neighbors. So your Ni should be 3. And you have all 3 neighbors are connected to each other. All 3 neighbors, this is the total number of connection that you can have among neighbors. So that should be 3 times 2 divided by 2, which is 3. So 3 by 3, which is 1. Here, you have only 1 neighboring point, so that's 1. And then it's divided by, again, 3 times 2 divided by 2. And here you don't have your Ni is 0, so that's 0. So the more friends know each other, the higher the clustering coefficient is. That's the idea. So with this top 10 nodes by closeness centrality, this is drug trafficking network. And if you look here, the data is pretty spread out regarding clustering coefficient, closeness, and betweenness. And then we did the same thing with this one, Hudson River data. So if you look at this data, this is actually, the data are much close, like clustering coefficient is very close, and this close, all data are kind of similar compared to this one. And remember, the density of this is much lower than the density of that. Then we also look at the deviation from the average for both network. This is for the drug trafficking network. And this is for the Hudson River network, which has higher density. So you can see, because the data is much closer, we can see the deviation of the average is much, much smaller for this, or similar, I would say. So this is what we found. We took the average of drug trafficking network, which is 0.23 for drug trafficking network, and this is 0.02, this is 0.45. And for Hudson is the higher density network, Hudson River, is 0.44, and this one is 0.60. What interesting thing we observed here is actually we did use the spectral clustering method for higher density network for Hudson River. And with the original data using spectral clustering method, we found the MCUT value is 3.3746. Then we have used linkage-based refinement techniques, and we have used this several times. and multiple moves were acceptable, and the MCAT value was decreased to 2.3753 from 3.3746. So the question is, we don't know, we still have to do more research, that whether the combination method will be much more applicable to the higher density network than the lower density network. And then, okay, so we did all these things, so what? So where we are going from here? Big deal, we did all this math, and what is going to happen to real life? So what we did, this technique, what we used, it can potentially be used to investigate criminal network, to identify the key players, strategists, leaders, brokers, etc., and to uncover network within a network, meaning which actors are strongly bonded and who are not. We can also do group detection. It's critical for understanding the structure and the dynamics of a network to disrupt a network in an efficient manner. And the same method with some variations may be applicable to identify groups or clusters within a human trafficking network and assist law enforcement officials to plan an efficient disruption strategy. So what we have learned during this process that the key players in the drug trafficking network are kind of brokers, and they hold the important positions, and they don't want to be caught very easily. But the leaders actually have less connection. So during this process, we may lose the leader who may have hold important position and also the leader of the drug trafficking network. But because we look at the connection strength, it may be an isolated point, or it may be, it doesn't have too much connection. So we may lose some of those important, leaders from our network when we're actually analyzing it. And the players who are actually, who have high degree centrality are the most common people who can be, caught by the police very easily because they have high visibility. So when we disconnect the graph in two groups, we try to see, okay, which group can survive on its own without getting help from the other group, because they have, they can survive because they have connections between themselves strong. And like when we partition two graphs, network, we can see that group A or group B can survive on its own without communicating with each other. Again, that is, very, I'm saying it in a very simple way, but it may not be the true case. And then again, this is acknowledgement. We're very thankful to the Department of Homeland Security to give us this opportunity to work on this project during the summer. We thank Deanna Austin, who is actually the workforce development lead of CINA. Stu McKenzie, who is also the former deputy director of CINA. Jim Jones, who is the director of CINA. And then we also want to acknowledge and very thankful to Sam Carney, Corey Everington, Hector from Bluestone Analytics, who actually had several meetings with us and listened to us very patiently, worked with us and analyzed and told us, explain the data that they provided to us. And Beth White from Department of Homeland Security, with whom I specifically communicated many times to get feedback in different issues. And lastly, we want to also thank Dr. Andrew T. Phillips from United States Naval Academy, who actually provided us a very crucial help during the first step of our work, because Katie and I are kind of novice in Python programming. So he actually helped us to, significant help during the initial stage of the research, summer research with the programming coding. And thank you everybody for being here. And any question? Thank you.
Actually, I have a question.
Yeah.
Which is, you mentioned or especially towards the end of your presentation, you made reference to the Hudson River data, and I thought it might be appropriate just for you to maybe provide a synopsis of what that's about. And
yeah, I can do that.
Yeah.
So I think that's a very interesting question. So the original network has it was a directed network. We actually looked at, this was done before, we compared, we built the network before. So what we did, we looked at the biodiversity, the animal prey and predators in the Hudson River. And we developed a directed network where the arrows goes from prey to predators. And then that's a directed network. And then we built a competition graph among this group of species, and we connected the nodes or the species by an edge if they have at least one shared common prey. So from directed network, remember the arrow goes from, follows the direction of food flow. So the arrows are going from prey to predators, then two predators will be connected to each other if they have at least one shared common prey. If they have four shared common preys, then these two predators are connected by an edge, and the edge will be 4. So higher the edge weight is, that means they compete for more for food, they compete for food. We did not look at the primary food, or some species take some preys, they use it primary food. We really did not look at that because that will make it more complicated. We just looked at the whether they have common preys or not. So Ezra, did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Are there any other
Yeah.
questions? I have a question.
Okay.
Where would you publish this work?
Where did I publish this
Yeah,
book?
where did you or where would you publish? Yeah.
Okay, so I did not, this is just last summer work, this summer. We just finished it.
Mhm.
And so we haven't done anything yet with this. And I don't think we can do anything without permission of CINA and DHS also. We have received the original data from Bluestone Analytics. And Katie is here, if Katie wants to say hi here. And we actually was able to look at players of the drugs who are actually dealing with drugs. We looked at the original text, but we realized it's kind of overwhelming for us because it's so much text, and it takes a long time to develop a data network from that. So we take more than the time that we had, and we received the data in the last 2 weeks, so we couldn't do it. But during the process, we had to, it was a requirement that we have to submit another proposal for 1 year. And we did it, and we're looking forward to it, that if we can get it, then we can actually work with the real data. And regarding the publication, we have not thought about it. I think the first part is basically we have to talk to the DHS, and my college started right after we finished. So I even didn't look at it until today or yesterday. So, but we are really excited. If we get the next grant for 1 year grant, then we can actually work on the real data. That's the idea. And it's exciting to see how the drug trafficking network works, and what kind of language they use. And they look at cocaine and meth and everything. It's scary, but it's exciting. It's also exciting to see it. Yeah. So do you have any suggestion for publication by any chance?
I think it would be, so I've seen publications like this in the social science journals and the network science journals. So not necessarily, the graph theory journals and mathematics, but the graph theory journals of network science. Network science has like become a different field almost. So there's lots of publications, venues there. Yeah. So my next question is, now you started with the data set. You did, you obtained the Laplacian, and then you found the second smallest eigenvalue, and you looked at its eigenvector, which is the Fielder vector, right? So yeah. So, and then you said, there's another slide, you talked about you applied spectral clustering methods. So I was wondering if you could talk more about the spectral clustering methods that you used.
Okay, so we actually followed this algorithm. If you look here, so we built the original, the graph that we built from the adjacency matrix, the undirected graph, that we call similarity matrix. Let's say, for example, that's K. And then we find the eigenvector V corresponding to the second smallest eigenvalue, which we did, right? But the assumption is the graph is completely connected. It will work if the graph is connected. So you have to check whether you have only one eigenvalue which has zero value. If the eigenvalue has zero eigenvalue has higher multiplicity, then graph has several disconnected components. So assuming the graph is connected, you can either look at unnormalized spectral clustering or normalized. I think we look at unnormalized here. We did normalized spectral clustering. And then what we did, we look at the eigenvector corresponding to the second smallest eigenvalue, which is non-zero. And you look at the elements of the second eigenvector. So if the elements are greater than or equal to 0, we put them in one cluster. We put the nodes associated to those elements to one cluster, and the nodes associated with the elements which have negative values in the different cluster.
So is there some theoretical reason why?
Yes, yeah, there is a long, big proof. Yeah, there are papers involved that, yes, you have to actually do the math, a long proof. Yes, yeah, there are many papers involved that, but it's pretty involving math. Yeah.
So did you apply any other community detection methods besides the spectral clustering method?
I have not. I actually was working with spectral clustering with Hudson River, and I think that is probably ready for publication because that work is completely done. But if you have any suggestion, we can definitely look at it, because if we get the grant, I mean, we are going to take some students and we can give them work to do. So if you think that there are some other relevant that we can use, then we are open for ideas. Yeah.
Okay.
We used a combination, spectral clustering and linkage-based technique. The one thing we probably want to explore right now, that whether the density of the graph matters if we use the combination method. I think it does, but unless we do more research, I am not confirmed. It's not confirmed yet.
So are there any other questions? I have two more, but let me open the floor to
Okay.
other people. All right, so let me just ask then. You said you use similarity measures. So there are multiple similarity measures that can be used. Did you have a preferred one?
I use similarity measure based on the, what did I use? Weights. So I think what I did, let me go back. What was the definition? So if you look here, so what we did here, I think we look at a cut AV, and if you look here, the measurement that we look at, the weights between the I and jth node, where I belongs to cluster A and J belongs to cluster B. So you look at the age when between two actors or two nodes, which belongs to two different, we assume that they belong to different cluster. And we want to minimize that when you do the partition, because we want to do the partition in an optimal way, so that the proper way, so that the connection within, similarity within the cluster is higher. So the weights are kind of, more connected to the nodes within the cluster. And if you look here, WA, that is, if you put instead of B, you put A, it's basically you're looking at the weights among two different nodes within the same cluster. So what we try to do, we wanted to minimize this, right? Because that gives you a kind of measure between nodes of different, belongs to two different cluster, and maximize that. But I know you are actually involved in a lot of graph theory. So do you have any other similarity measures that you think may be appropriate for this kind of work?
I think so, but I'm not so familiar with this particular scenario, but I think so. So maybe we should talk.
We should talk later. Okay. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Are there any other questions? Should we thank the speaker? All right, let's thank the speaker.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I'll stop the recording.